Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing the new Netflix 6-part series Griselda. So briefly, Griselda chronicles the rise and fall of Colombian kingpin Griselda Blanco. Known as the cocaine godmother, Griselda Blanco was considered one of the most ruthless drug traffickers, responsible for hundreds of deaths, including that of her 3 husbands. Griselda was previously played by Catherine Zeta-Jones in the Lifetime movie Cocaine Godmother. Griselda Blanco is essentially known as a trailblazer for her innovative drug trafficking techniques. Before arriving in Miami, she had about 10 years plus of experience in the drug trafficking game. There were rumors that she was actually mentored by Pablo Escobar, who reportedly said that the only man he was ever afraid of was a woman named Griselda Blanco. So Griselda's life of crime actually started when she was just 11 years old, when she kidnapped and then killed a young boy when his parents refused to pay ransom. And she then resorted to prostitution and pickpocketing, and when she was about 13 years old, she was living with a pimp and a document forger who eventually became her first husband. So she ended up having 3 children from this man, and allegedly she then had him killed. So the series focuses on her rise in Miami. It doesn't chronicle her life from childhood all the way up until her incarceration. So the series takes a number of creative liberties that are not 100% true, but they do add to the plot. Like, they do make it more entertaining. I thought Sofia Vergara's performance was incredible, and I thought she may have even humanized Griselda a lot more than she deserved. So Griselda's estate actually sued Netflix and Sofia, which I think is actually a mistake, because they will not get a more flattering portrayal of a woman that just seemed in real life to be very cold and homicidal. Actually, I have to say, as much as I enjoyed this series, I felt very underwhelmed, because the more you read about Griselda, the more episodes the series requires. And this is coming from the makers of Narcos, which is one of the greatest television shows of all time. Like, it's gritty, it's dark. So I was hoping for that same gritty and dark approach. And when you only have 6 episodes, you need to focus on one thing, which the series does not focus on. Like, just to give you insight about Griselda on so many different levels, like Griselda as a mom, Griselda as a lover, Griselda as a drug trafficker. The problem with that is that a lot of these characters don't really develop. Like, they kind of stay on a superficial level. And the casting on this show is phenomenal. And I wish some of these characters had like standout episodes, so we got to know them more. And actually, Griselda's life, her early life is just as important as her later life. And I wish they took the same approach as they did with Pablo Escobar. And even, you don't even have to unpack it in one season. Could have done a 2-part series. And I think that would have made for a much grittier and much more entertaining series, because even the stuff with the police officer and the investigation, like, there just isn't enough time to flesh that out. And so the only character that really gets developed, or you really feel like you get to know in some way, is Griselda, which again is just a shame, because the casting is 10 out of 10. Like, they try to give everyone like equal screen time, but that doesn't really equate to character development. So in terms of performances, as I said, the casting is 10 out of 10. So Sofia Vergara's performance as Griselda was incredibly well done. And I felt like, again, she humanized this woman a lot more than she deserved. Like, I believed her as this loving mother and this, loving wife, but then also as this ruthless drug trafficker. I also thought the casting around her was 10 out of 10. Like, I wish we had standout episodes, like her sons, the woman around her, her cartel. Like, they tried their best, again, to give everybody some screen time, but it just kind of left you wanting more. In terms of how the story is constructed, again, it's only 6 episodes, and I thought that it was constructed well enough that it's easy to binge. And they do a good job of trying to parallel Griselda's story with a woman by the name of Detective June Hawkins. And June Hawkins is actually the woman responsible for identifying Griselda as this drug kingpin. And at the time, June was one of the few female officers working in Miami PD. And because she was quite new, people would not take her seriously. And they also couldn't really wrap their brains around a female drug kingpin. Like, this was just not something that they were willing to accept. And during this time, Miami was actually the sort of murder capital of America, thanks to Griselda Blanco. And so the way that the series kind of parallels their lives is showing like their similarities. Both of these women really struggled with gaining respect, especially among their peers. At the start of their careers, you know, they're both divorced and they're both struggling with work-life balance. They're incredibly undervalued, they're incredibly sort of underappreciated, and they have to work really hard to find their voice and get the people around them to take them seriously, right? Griselda is repeatedly called a housewife, and at some point June was about to quit. Like, it wasn't worth the stress of dealing with all these men. She thought it would be easier if she just became a secretary. So both of them have this struggle of not only being taken seriously, but also being credited for their work, like publicly acknowledged for everything that they're doing. The series starts with Griselda in Miami, and it's important to note that she had about 10 years of experience prior to arriving in Miami. And I think because the series doesn't start from her childhood, it allows Sophia to humanize her again, perhaps way more than she deserved. The series starts in chaos. We're introduced to Griselda running into her house, tending to a gunshot wound, and trying to get her sons like into a car, and they basically like escape to Miami. And so throughout the series we get flashbacks and glimpses into what exactly she was escaping from. So according to the series, Griselda shot her second husband because he forced her to sleep with his brother. Now, there's no actual proof that this is true, and it is believed that the reason that she shot her husband is because he was stealing money from the business. But again, this detail does allow us to kind of sympathize with her more, because when she arrives in Miami, she really does seem like a housewife. Like, she does seem like someone genuinely trying to start over, trying to really provide for her sons, until you realize that not only does she want to start over, she wants to take over. And she's not in Miami for like longer than 5 minutes before she's just like already back in the drug game. Like, so Griselda is an incredibly ambitious, charismatic individual that just refuses to take no for an answer. Part of the series focuses on Griselda trying to get her foot in the door, and even before she rises to this level, it's very clear that this is a very dangerous profession. And despite the number of near-death experiences, one in particular, she's never demotivated. And the series makes it clear that this is not a woman that is motivated by money. She's very much motivated by the chase, and she's very much addicted to power. Like, throughout the series, she has a number of opportunities to sell out and make more than enough money, not only to take care of her sons, but to start over, right, to live comfortably. And yet she turns it down every single time. And she becomes so obsessed with the idea of becoming a boss. And what's interesting is not only does she want to be like a boss, but she wants to be publicly recognized as a boss. She wants to be known as the female Pablo Escobar, but bigger. Like, she wants people to put respect on her name. Like, it is not enough for her to be behind the scenes, pulling the strings. Like, no. She wants everybody to know that she's the one pulling the strings, and she wants credit for all her work. And in a field dominated by homicidal men, I guess women can be homicidal too. Like, I was like, this is not the type of industry where you really want to be putting your name on things. Like, it's better to be behind the scenes. But Griselda said, no, I want to be front and center. As I said, the series, I feel, humanizes this woman more than she deserves. When you actually look into who Griselda was, she's quite terrifying. Like, this is a woman that, if there's anyone that belonged behind bars, it is Griselda Blanco. And so the series tries to balance sort of Griselda as a mother, Griselda as a loving wife, and Griselda as a drug trafficker. Like, they try to compartmentalize these things, and I think this helps us like root for her. Like, I don't know why I was rooting for this woman the entire time. I was like, yeah, put respect on her name. And then you realize what kind of person she is, and I'm just like, why am I rooting for this woman? So we don't actually spend a lot of time with her sons. And one of her justifications for doing a lot of the horrible things that she's doing is to provide for her sons, right? It's to give them a better life. But all she does is expose them to chaos and drug addiction. And like, we don't, like, the character development with her sons is not really there. Like, her youngest son is invisible. There's one son that becomes addicted to drugs, but we're not really sure how that happened. And her older son is kind of the moral compass. And so Griselda's idea of being a good mother is like, I've given you all these material items and that should be enough. But she's never actually there to guide them in any moral or spiritual way, because she's not really in a position to do that. Now, in terms of Griselda as a loving wife, I'm not gonna lie, like, her relationship to Dario was so well done. And Dario in real life was a psychopath. Like, he was an incredibly terrible person. And we get glimpses into like how terrible he is in the series, but not enough of a glimpse that we hate him. Like, he ends up being one of the most likable figures on screen. Like, I was just like, I thought this man was fine. Like, I was looking at him. I thought the chemistry between them was really working. Like, he's kind of like her loyal servant, like her loyal dog. And I really like that about him. And again, the series does this weird thing where it just, again, humanizes people that are just low-key, like, absolute monsters. Dario is an interesting character because the series takes kind of an awkward time jump at one point, and you kind of see that Griselda's time at the top is coming to an end because physically she's deteriorating. Like, eventually she becomes addicted to her own drugs. She looks like she's rotting, but Dario looks fine. Like, this guy ends up glowing up as the series goes on, and he actually ends up being the only person that develops any kind of moral compass and finds a way out. Again, in this trade, like, once you're in it, there's only one way out, which is death. And so Griselda ends up basically worse off than when she began. Right at the start of the series, she had a community, she had a group of people around her. Even though she was living in this dingy motel, she still had like optimism and hope. And by the end of the series, she ends up back in this dingy motel with no friends, with people coming after her. Like, she becomes basically the cartel's #1 enemy. Like, she went from being feared to everyone just wanting to kill her. Of course, she has no money, no resources, but she still has this weird optimism that she's able to get back out there. And I think the series did a good job of really stressing that, again, this is a woman that's motivated by power, not so much money. And she's willing to kind of pursue this at the expense of every single person around her. And this type of lifestyle never ends well. Right? Like, at one point, she's living in this mansion. She's living like the high life. And she ends up actually being the cause of her own demise. Paranoia, her inability to kind of see anything beyond her own ego and her own existence just causes her to end up exactly where you end up in these situations, right? In prison with literally nothing and no one. Again, the series kind of touches on this, but while she's incarcerated, 3 of her sons end up dead. So it seems like they may have followed in her footsteps. And that would be my criticism of the series as well. Like, we don't really get to know her children enough or know anybody outside of Griselda and Dario to really feel attached to anybody. So when we get this information, it's quite a shock, right? Like, I didn't know how the story ended, so when I saw that, I was like, oh my god, what just happened to them? Overall, again, I think the series is very much worth watching just for Sofia Vergara's performance. My only criticism is that I think they tried to balance too much. I think they should have either focused on Griselda as a drug trafficker, Griselda as a lover, or Griselda with her children. I also think they could have taken a different approach, like going back to Narcos. They don't try to humanize Pablo Escobar. They just kind of try to show you sort of what he does. Like, they tried to focus on the trade as a whole. So I wish the series kind of took that approach, kind of a bird's eye approach, and tried to really show us her reach and focused on the effects Griselda had on the trade. And I think that would have helped quite a bit. In terms of approach, like, I don't understand why Griselda had to be likable. Like, women can be homicidal maniacs too. And there's a difference between sympathizing with someone and getting us to understand why they are the way that they are. And Griselda was someone who was abused by men, tortured by men. And so I think unpacking that would have allowed the audience a little more room to make their own judgment. And so I think they should have just told the story exactly as it was and presented Griselda as exactly as she was, which was a very ruthless person who really enjoyed killing and torturing people. Like, towards the end of her life, she died coming out of a butcher shop, right? She was shot. And so this is someone who had a lot of enemies, and for good reason. Like, this was not a good person, an individual that was beyond redemption. And I think it would have made for a more honest series if they just presented Griselda like for who she was, instead of trying to get the audience to root for her or sympathize with her. Like, we don't really need to do all that with an individual like this, because again, Griselda is quite a vicious human being. Like, when you look into her, you realize this is not someone you should be rooting for or you should have any sympathy for. But in the series, you kind of do, and I'm not really sure how I feel about that yet. And again, because the series doesn't start off from the beginning of her life, there's a lot of sort of critical information that's left out that would help contextualize why she is the way that she is. And so in that case, it might have even benefited from more episodes and just started from the beginning and just gone that epic route. She did seem like that type of person where there was enough material there to have like a lot more episodes. And so it did feel rushed at times, but again, I was able to binge it in one sitting. So for that, I would say have a look, and you guys let me know what you think.